Good morning and welcome to the Mobile Hunter podcast stage. I am Rick Cates. I am one of the hosts of the Mobile Hunter podcast, along with Christopher Leppert, Josh Luck, and Jacob Sklenner. Today is a very special day. We're really excited for this episode. This is going to be part of our Whitetail Apprentice Series that Josh, Jacob, and Chris are doing that starts next week. So some of you have stickers on your chairs. There's a QR code on the back. Live shows are great. Listening to them later is even better because you can take the knowledge with you. So there's a QR code there that you can scan that you guys can listen to this at a later date. This is a live Q&A. Just for purposes of asking questions when we get to that point, there's a camo X right in the middle row. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll ask you to come back to that X and we can ask questions that way. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Andy May, and please give him a warm Mobile Hunters Expo welcome.
So I just want to touch on a little bit of this is going to be a concluding episode of our series. And this whole series is basically made to develop hunters into as much of an expert as you can be through at the beginning a really brief breakdown and then getting into a lot of depth on individual topics. So we'll have experts on for scrapes, rubs, rut, travel, things like that. But we want to encapsulate what it means to be a holistic hunter, someone who adapts to each situation, who makes the determination that they're going to learn no matter the situation, and really hones their strategy to that. And we couldn't really think of a better guest than you for that. I know you're super humble and and you'll smile at that, but I'm sure that the audience speaks for itself here and who's attending and who will be listening to this, that you are as holistic as it gets, and we are trying to capture that whole process that you go through and really touch on the different disciplines that we have now hopefully mastered throughout the episodes of the series. So we're very, very excited to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Should be fun.
Yeah.
Just to hit on the series a little bit more for the audience. Like Rick said, the series is going to start in August, and it's going to run from August all the way through November. It's a very comprehensive series. Anyone from the whitetail novice to someone that has been hunting for years and years is going to be able to take something from each of those episodes and apply it to the woods. So it's something that we are excited for, something that I've never seen done. We are going to, like Jake said, we have individuals like Andy May. We'll have Jake Bush on there, a couple hunters talking about their entire process and how they kind of put everything together that we cover in the series. And then each episode of the series, we do deep dives into different topics. So it's going to be a really cool setup, something I'm excited for our listeners to hear.
And so our goal here with this podcast is to kind of go through one. I don't think we really need to do a whole lot of an intro to you. You're an incredibly efficient hunter. A lot of people know who you are because of it. But we wanted to touch on that. You never stop learning. You're always seeking to challenge yourself. And we wanted to really get on to specific examples of failures and learning points, but through that, go through your entire process. So hopefully the audience can take and see that you're adapting to the given situation and you're moving through all the way to potentially a successful kill. And the first thing that we want to break down, just to get right into the details of it, is how you select a property. Now, I know your approach may be a little different in state than it is out of state, but in general, what are the things that you're looking for in a property, maybe from acreage, pressure, and those kind of standpoints?
Sure. Yeah, well, first, I just want to thank everyone for coming to listen. It's pretty awesome. I'll try to do my best to answer these questions. As far as like picking out a property, it really depends. So just a little background, I'm from Michigan. My bread and butter is whitetails here in Michigan. I've hunted a boatload of public and permission stuff here, but I also travel out of state. I've hunted 20 different states, lots of different species, whitetails, kind of all across the country, mule deer, antelope, elk, axis deer, bear. So I love bow hunting. In that answering that question is a little different depending on where I'm going. In Michigan, which honestly, if any of you guys are from Michigan, you know how difficult it can be here to find a place to hunt, or find a mature deer to hunt. So I'm most proud of the bow hunting success that I've had in Michigan. Even though like the antler size might be a tick down from some of the other states I've hunted, I'm most proud of those deer and those hunts. But in Michigan, it's pretty much any and everything. So I've kind of throughout my hunting life, I've hunted all different sizes of public land. There was a time there where it wasn't so hard to get permission. You could knock on some doors, and I was hunting things that were as small as 2 or 3 acres to as big as 80 to 120 acres, permission stuff. And uh, same with public, 10,000 acres down to a 60 of hapland or something. So I didn't rule anything out in Michigan, because I found to find a mature deer, something that I'm after in Michigan, I need to spread my net far and wide. Um, if I were to limit myself to one public piece, I don't care where it is in Michigan, or one private piece, my success would be much less. For the type of deer that I'm looking for. And I'm looking for an older age class deer, a mature deer. I'm not entirely worried about what it's carrying for headgear. I love big antlers. I love big heavy antlers with character. But a lot of times it's a struggle just to find a 4-year-old deer here, even on some really good private land. So when I'm looking for a property in Michigan, it literally, if it can be hunted, I will consider it. I will scout it. I will see if it's worth my time. And what I found too is that a lot of these places may not be good every year. And that's been a really key to my success here, is spreading that net. Essentially I hunt 4 different counties, to put that in perspective. Probably 15 or so different public pieces. And now I'm probably down to about a handful of permission pieces. And all those permission pieces are very pressured. Those are the type of landowner that says yes. If you go and ask him, he's going to tell you yes. So a lot of times that's the hardest scenario, because you're in a pressured setting with the walls closed in, and you can't do a lot of maneuvering. It's a really tough deal. But what I found, and what's been a major key to success here, is spreading that net, scouting all of it, trying to keep tabs on it best I can with limited time and driving and all that, and then searching for that one buck to pursue. It's not devoting myself to this public piece or this private piece or these 2 pieces. If I did that, could I take a 2 or 3-year-old buck every year? Yeah, probably. But I'm just not looking for that anymore. I'm looking for that older age class. So I consider everything. There are certainly some pieces that have just never produced for me, given the pressure or maybe the neighbors. And then there's other pieces that will produce every few years. And the more I've hunted these types of areas, the more I've realized is that some of these spots, most of these spots, through experience, they have a time when they're most optimal for big deer. It could be just a big deer slips through the cracks. He gets wounded as a 2-year-old. He makes it. 3-year-old, nobody gets him, and now you got a 4 or 5-year-old deer. But other times, especially when it's based around either early season or the rut, a lot of times some of these properties can be good in a very specific window, and that's what I've learned to key in on. Not devoting myself to this property or this piece of public all year long. It's finding the little nuances of when certain sections or certain pieces are optimal for big buck usage. And a lot of times you find those windows like during the rut, or like I said, sometimes early season when a buck is still in a bachelor group, or for whatever reason, it's a kind of an early season location. So I work these like 4 counties, and I've found through experience, trends and different areas that produce at those specific times of the year. And I'm always learning, and they're always changing. And one year, this particular ribbon bottom can be like really good during the rut. And you go and you sit there, but there's no mature bucks, or you're running a camera out there and there's no mature bucks. And that's just the game we play here in Michigan. That's been my experience. I've never had a piece that just produces every year. So it's just like when you ask me how do I pick a property, I'll consider everything. Now, if someone gives me permission and it's just like a little tiny block of woods and there's, houses all around it or something, I'll go scout it and see, but I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time there. So I try to be efficient with my time. I try to narrow down the pieces that tend to be good at certain times of the year, the pieces that tend to hold mature deer, but I will consider everything. And I've killed some really big bucks in some areas that you would never expect. Kind of living under people's noses, and other ones in the more traditional areas that you would think are really, common knowledge. Like we all talk about it on podcasts. Like that'll never hunt or work in Michigan because like that's going to be where everybody goes, and then you go there and there's nobody there. You know, there's still, most hunters are still going to be lazy. Your average hunter, so if you can put in more work, there's more guys than ever putting in work. But if you could put in more work, put in more time, and be smart about your decisions, you could still separate yourself. It's just getting harder to do.
Absolutely.
Now, when you were talking about spreading that net over those 4 counties, and with a limited time, you're trying to be smart with your time. Are you doing a lot of e-scouting, or is it a mix of e-scouting versus boots on the ground? How does that look for you?
Yeah, so like when I say that spread that net, that's kind of like what I've accumulated over the last 25 years of hunting in Michigan. So on areas that are maybe far from home or that aren't conducive to glassing, I'll run some cameras and try to get an inventory. Sometimes it's a camera that I place in a spot where I want to check it, before season starts to see if there's a buck there. More than likely I'll have some history. I know that area has some good bucks early or has that potential. But then there's other times where I put cameras out and I just let them soak for the year, and then I use that information to kind of build on. And that's what gives me those trends. That's what gives me those little windows where like, wow, October 25th through November 7th was just really good here, but the rest of the season it was dead. There was only little bucks and does. Well, then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to start zeroing in on that, and then maybe that's when a big buck does show up. That's when I put my time in that instead of like beating it to death all season long. And it takes time to do that. In areas that are a little more open, that are more conducive to it, I love to glass. I spend about 3 weeks leading up to our opener glassing a lot, with the only goal to find like 1 or 2 mature bucks to go after. And it's not always your typical, drive around glassing. That might work in Kentucky, that might work in Iowa, it might work in Kansas. A lot of times here, yes, we still see some nice deer from the road, but what I've found is if you're seeing it from the road, so is somebody else. It doesn't take too many cars stopping and getting out and glassing. And our deer here are they're like cracked out, man. I mean, they're literally cracked out. They see a car stop and they're running. They're on alert, even though they might be 400 yards away. So what I found is I have to get off the road. I have to get off the beaten path. Maybe I cut through a cornfield, or I cut on the backside of the woods or over a hill, and I'm out in the field glassing, or I get up high in a tree, 25, 30 foot overlooking a marsh before season glassing. And what I found is if I put that time in 3 weeks leading up to the season, the reason I choose 3 weeks and not sooner is because I still have a window or an opportunity to capture that deer on that pattern. If I start in July, which I'll go out and glass and just kind of get a feel for some deer and see if they're alive. But I really spend most of my time in that like 3 to 2.5 weeks leading up to the season, because I don't want to spend a ton of time all summer, like starting in July and taking time away from my kid and my family and putting stress there. I want to do it very intermittently, focus on some other things that I think will help me become a better hunter that I can do at home. Online scouting, shoot my bow, those kinds of things. And then I focus that on that window with the goal to get on a good mature buck in those first, couple days of the season. And by doing that and spending that time and committing that time, I've been able to do that, probably the last 10 or 12 years. Not always killing them, but often killing them. But at least getting an encounter or getting a game plan to go after a specific deer.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's really important to just reiterate a point is you're trying out everything. And oftentimes you've come to your determination of the properties that you have options for and what you select and how you rotate through your season based on all the hard work and failure you've done on the front end. So um, it's not like you're just going into these situations and you're immediately succeeding on your initial thought, or a property that looked good may not pan out, or something that looked terrible because you gave it a shot ended up being good. So I just want to reiterate to the audience is this is work that's been done over time. It's involved a lot of failure, and you're reaping the benefit of it, and you're still doing it, even though you may be able to sit back and say, I've learned this over time, and just rotate through your season of this property's good for these 7 days, and I can make that my whole season and keep flipping through. You're still deciding to do the work, and you're adapting and evolving just the same way that everyone here at this expo is here to adapt and evolve and become more mobile as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
things change too. Like patterns that you see, you know, that you start to key in on, they change. Maybe a private land neighbor moves in and he starts shooting everything, or he's putting pressure over here, or crop rotation. So it's like this is a long term play. You know, like just speaking from Michigan here, the way hunting in Michigan, it's a long term play that it wasn't always that way. Like before, it was just grinding, spending every day I could in the tree all season long, maybe just for that one crack at a good buck. And it's turned into a much more efficient style of covering a lot of ground, being really good at covering ground, good at monitoring, knowing where to look, when to look, and then having that confidence to go in and strike when it happens. But I just want to emphasize that it wasn't always that way, and I wasn't always very efficient, and I have made a ton of mistakes, and I still do every year, which I think is a really important thing to grow. And for me, if I'm not like pushing myself and trying new things, I don't feel like I'm growing. So I still make. I was telling you before the podcast, I'm quite certain I make way more mistakes than any one of my friends, but I'm also getting way more encounters with mature deer than any one of my friends. So I'm pushing the limit, in different styles and different levels of aggressiveness. So it's this road it's a long road. So give yourself some time and some patience with yourself to kind of grow. Be willing to make those mistakes. Just make sure you learn from them, because that's what's going to turn you into a better hunter.
yeah, going back and learning is absolutely crucial. That's where you can go into a hunt and get 500 yards from where you need to be and be nervous about it, and you don't fail from the point that you didn't spook the deer, but you usually don't see the deer. You don't figure out why you were wrong pushing the envelope. You bump that deer at 10 yards. You get to sit in that bed and see exactly what the deer was doing. You get to learn a lot in the case of a failure like that. So I think that we talked about before the podcast as well, forming your instincts. Like, you have these great instincts that you tap into, but those have been built and forged through failure. And I think that's really important for our audience to understand, is that failure is not only a good thing, but it's necessary for success, especially consistent success.
It's a prerequisite for success.
Absolutely.
You have to, it sucks. It's heartbreaking when you blow a big buck out, when you miss that shot. But though, if you take that, you internalize it, and then you improve on it, like that mistake might get you 5 more big bucks down the road.
Yep.
So you just gotta, like, and I beat myself up just as much as anybody. I've gotten a little better at it now because I've seen certain times, like in my hunting life, where I've made mistakes, maybe for a couple years, and I get to a point where I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. I got to fix this. And then I do, and then it's gotten me, so many other deer down the road by making those changes. But you talked about the instincts. I just want to touch on it real quick. Um, I rely on my instincts a lot, and it kind of sounds like what's that? Hocus pocus. It's like I said early on, I spent a lot of time just grinding it out every day. I killed deer with persistence, just being bullheaded, just being out there, and eventually one walks by and I get my crack. Well, then, I quickly found out, like, I was reading magazines and stuff from some of like maybe the TV hunters that are hunter managed land. And, you stay out of the bedding areas, you hunt back, you observe, you hunt this, these trails. And I was doing that, but I was always seeing deer. I'd see two or three nice deer out of range, you know. So then I just was never taught how to hunt or how not to hunt. So I just started diving in and going after them. Literally, like, oh, I saw him over there, I'm going over there. Oh, I saw him over here, I'm going over there. It's thick. You're going in and you're bumping deer, you're blowing the whole woods out. But by doing that, by being kind of almost dumb and reckless, I was starting to the journey of like fine tuning those instincts. Like, okay, that was obviously way too aggressive. How can I still make a move like that without being so detrimental to the area? And you start to learn what's too much and what's too little. And that develops, over, 5 years, your instincts are way better than they were when you began. And then 10, it's way better. And now 25, 30 years, hunting whitetail in Michigan and species all across the country, it's like you start to develop these feelings, these gut feelings that stem from the mistakes that you've made in the past. And the things that you did where you pushed too far or you didn't push enough and you were out of the game. And it's like, oh. So now it's like I have instincts that I rely on, like these feelings. And I hear a lot of guys, like my buddy Mark Kenyon, who you guys probably know, like he second guesses himself all the time. And he's like waffling back and forth. And he's looking at all this data and he's going back and forth and he's driving himself nuts. And I'm like, man, just go with your gut. Just go with your gut, because if it's wrong, who cares? You're going to learn something there. And by being more aggressive, like talked about, like I recommend being a little more aggressive because you're inserting yourself into the game a little more, as opposed to standing on the outside where you might see something, you might get a shot, you probably won't. You're playing it safe. I'm scared to bump them. You're on the outside, you're looking, you don't see anything, you don't really know what happened. And I'm not saying be reckless, but I think it pays off in the long run to be a little more aggressive, like purposely aggressive, not reckless, but kind of go in and force those encounters, because when you do, now you're learning more. I hunt that way, so I'm getting 6, 7, 8, maybe more encounters with mature deer every year by doing that. I blow some out, I kill some of them. And when you do that, it fine tunes. You start to learn. You start to get more confidence about being in the ground and going in deep, or going in really close and setting up to where you think deer are, or stalking a deer when you see him bedded with a doe, or it could be a number of things. But you start to get these feelings and these intuitions, and if you just follow them and go with them, they fine tune over time. And then you're going to look back 10, 15, 20 years and you're like, man, I've come a long way. And you're just following these instincts. Mine are still wrong all the time, but they're right enough where I have good seasons.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to tap into that. And the best way to tap into that sometimes, like when I go out of state, sorry, I know I'm rambling.
No, you're
No, you're
good.
fine.
I purposely will choose to hunt an area without any scouting. I want to give myself that challenge to just show up, go completely off of what I see, what I feel, what I think, and see what happens. And when you don't do that, when you're just constantly trying to get cell cam pictures and this and find out where they're feeding and find out where they're bedding, which is all great, and I still do that a lot of the time, you can get kind of like so much information, and then you're just going off of that, and you're not maybe developing the instincts as much. But so I like to kind of challenge myself in a new area, just go in there and just on the fly. I don't even know what's there. But I'm just going off feel and instinct, what I see. Is it hot sign? Am I observing? Am I able to glass? I'm just slipping through the cover, looking for hot sign, looking for a spot to set up, or I might just do a scouting loop. Or I might bump into a buck, and now I'm in the game with a shooter that I never would have been if I didn't do that. So it's just a way to. I've heard Jared Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. We've talked about this a lot, him and I, about developing those instincts, and he prefers that. He's really good at that. He prefers to show up to a property with no scouting. Doesn't know anything about it. Just shows up, and just goes for it and just basically hunts off those instincts, and he's developed really good ones over time. So I think right now with technology and anything, we're kind of in this weird spot where we're getting away from some of that and trying to gather all this information in and go off that. And we want that for sure thing. And we want to know exactly where he's bedding and exactly this and exactly that. So we have all this information, then we can make a decision, which is very good and very efficient. And I do that. But there's this other side too that I am purposely trying to get better at. And I have gotten better at over the years. And it's a really freeing way to hunt.
Yeah,
Really enjoyable.
when you're not afraid of failure and you see failure as an opportunity, you tend to learn a lot more because you undergo those situations, you learn from them. I think it's important because a lot of people sit here and think like my goal is to go to the out of state property and find the buck right away, be right away. And I think you're on a little bit different of a journey in that you are trying to develop as a hunter more than you're trying to just kill a deer. And so your journey is trying to find, okay, what is a situation that I can put myself in that allows me to improve, that allows me to have more encounters, get more reps. Maybe I'm not very good at spot and stalking. I'm going to work on a lot of spot and stalking, things like that. So I think there's two sides to just wanting to kill a deer, and there's also the side of wanting to develop and seeking those situations. And we've talked a little bit about your process. We talked a little bit about e-scouting and how you may be looking for situations that just put you in the place to develop as a hunter. But particularly with e-scouting, are you looking? So let's say out of state because you're considering everything in state, size, whatever. Are you looking for things that are maybe difficult to access? Are you looking for, large swaths of public land where you can have multiple opportunities? Are you looking for maybe something that's overlooked, diversity? What are you kind of looking for before you decide where to go out of state?
Yeah, I'll usually, I'll usually pick an area. I'll do some research. If have a connection out there, or a friend that lives in a state, I love to pick their brain. Or maybe if they're more of like a private land guy, get them, get me in touch with somebody that maybe hunts a little more public, just to kind of get a gauge of, where's the pressure, how are the deer using this, what kind of areas. I think about like my first couple hunts out in Kentucky or Iowa. That's what I did. I did a ton of research up front to kind of narrow down. Um, I love big pieces. I love big pieces where I can get away from people, um, because I know that like I'm willing to go the extra mile and try to outwork the competition. But I also like those smaller pieces that are kind of out of the way that might get a little less pressure. And I've killed a lot of deer on those types of pieces. Ones that are away from town, kind of out in the middle, away from the big cities, all the stuff we know. But that those things still pay off. Even in today's age when we got so many hardcore guys, those things still pay off. It's just harder. You're just out there with a few more guys that are as good as you and as willing to put in the work. But yeah, I, I heard you mention like you like to focus on some areas that are more monotonous cover because it's harder to hunt and maybe keeps people out. And that's a good point. I never really even thought about that. Like I tend to stay away from that kind of stuff because it is harder to hunt. And most of the time, just to kind of give everybody an idea, like I work at a school, so I'm basically kind of a weekend warrior as far as like traveling out of state. I can get out after work locally a little bit, but most of my out of state trips are very short, 3-4 days, usually at the most, which makes it very tough. So I'm looking for spots that kind of set up well for that, where maybe like a big, flat, monotonous woods in Alabama probably wouldn't be my first choice, right? But it's not that I would ever want to hunt that. I would. I'd love to go and I'd love to learn, but I realize that's a hunt I would need more time.
Mm-hmm.
And to be efficient on these shorter hunts, you have a little different mindset. Like if I gave someone in our audience say, hey, you got, you drew a Kentucky tag, you got the whole you're free, you got as much time as you need, you can go down there, you can hunt, the whole season. You're gonna attack that with a little more of a relaxed approach, right? Or just say you're hunting in Michigan, right? you got a long clock. You got a lot of time. It's the same way I'm in Michigan. You're not really pressed for time as much. Um, but when I go on these trips, it's like it's now or never. Like I have to force an encounter. If I go and I sit back and I don't find what I need, I sit back and I'm out of the game, and there's day one, and then there's day two, and it's gone. Like I am super aggressive. My buddy Alex wrote an article about it, about having a 3-day mindset. When you have a 3-day mindset, you are super keyed in, you're super tuned in, you're very focused, and you do everything with a purpose, and you are ultra aggressive. And if you're not that way, you're going to go home empty-handed. But by putting myself in that scenario for years, multiple out-of-state trips like that a year, I kind of sucked at it at first. The first few, I went home empty-handed. Then I started killing, maybe 2-year-old buck. Next thing you know, I'm getting a little better at it. I'm fine-tuning things. I'm killing the 3, occasional 4-year-old buck, and now I'm doing it with some, pretty good consistency on some older age class deer. So again, it's you're throwing yourself into kind of a situation that most people wouldn't even do. I remember back in the day on the hunting beast, I asked that. I said, "Would you spend the tag $500 or whatever it is to go to Illinois to hunt 2 days?" And everybody on that thread said no. No, I would not do that. I did that before I wrote that thread, and I killed a 155-inch buck. So, but it was during the rut, but it's just like sometimes it's just having the balls to do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it'd be worth, that's a lot of money. I mean, 2 days, I mean, you hardly get to enjoy yourself. Well, if I don't do that, I don't go. I mean, that's the career I have. I don't get vacation time. I get 2 personal days a year. My vacation is summer. So it's like if I don't take those little windows to try it, I don't go at all. And I want to experience that stuff. So it's unknowingly, not really on purpose, it kind of developed a kind of a fearless style, aggressive style that can put me into action pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think going back to what you said earlier and challenging yourself and helping develop those instincts, right? Putting yourself in situations that you might not be comfortable with, to learn from, helps create versatility in what you're doing, which will then turn into, in my opinion, efficiency for those hunts, those quick 3-4 day hunts that you might have.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that because when I first started, like I am the type of guy, like probably a lot of people in here, I sought out, when I fell in love with bow hunting, like, okay, who's the best? Who is the best bow hunter around here? I need to learn from this guy. And being from Michigan, you start doing some research, you see like a John Eberhard or a couple other guys. So it's like, you read their books, you start figuring out, and they got a system dialed in. And I did exactly what he said, to scout, how to scout. And I worked hard in the off season, and then I found these rut funnels and found these primary scrapes. And yeah, I killed some nice deer. I'd have, 1 or 2, maybe 3 encounters a year. And, that's, if you're in Michigan and you're doing that, that is pretty incredible, on some good deer. But then, it didn't take long for me to see that it's very kind of rut oriented, and it gives me a window to be effective in. But I really sucked early season, and I really sucked late season. I couldn't get on anything. So then I start, just the way my mind is like, okay, I see this guy over here. He's killing, my buddy Jesse. He's killing a early season buck every single year on opening day. I'm like, how's he doing that? So I reach out to Jesse Coots from New York. He killed his target buck like 5 years in a row on opening day. I'm like, how are you doing this? So I'm picking his brain, and and he's doing what I told you guys in the beginning. He's spending 3 weeks leading up to the season just relentless glassing and finding that one buck with a chink in his armor that's showing some vulnerability, and he's slipping in, he's killing him. I start doing that, I start killing him early. And then the same thing with late. I get my buddy Luke's killing him late. I'm like, how in the world? Like, I can't even find a buck late season here. I started adopting some of those strategies. Well, then you see guys that like, maybe a guy like Jared Scheffler or something. He's killing them all from the ground, like sneaking around. Like, well, I'm not doing that. Like, I want to do that, like that. He's doing something that I can't do, or that I probably can do, but I don't know how to do it. So then you just start trying that. And I got another buddy that's killing all these big bucks over decoys. It's like, so then I started using decoys and trying it. Um, and then before long, it's like you've become this like super versatile hunter because you've made it a point to learn these tactics from these guys, go out and try them, fail, fail again, fail again. Oh, I got one. Fail again. Oh, I got one again. Oh, now I got another one. Now you're starting to get good at it. So I've made it a point to be versatile. I don't really think, like I told you, I don't really think I'm good at any one thing. I don't think I'm great at any one thing. I think I'm good at a lot of little things. And that's good enough to be successful, because when you're able to throw yourself into a new area, a new state, a new property, and you're feeding off those instincts, but you have those tools, like the decoys in the back. I got the hard body one. I got the one I can strap to my bow. I feel very comfortable, slip hunting through the woods, still hunting with my bow, because I've done it, because I've tried it enough and it's worked enough. It's either gotten me kills or it's got me in the game with big bucks that I never would have known were there. So now I have this confidence to try all these things, and I have those tools available. It does make you a little more versatile and efficient hunter across the board.
Yeah, and I really like the point you made about being good at a lot of different things, and that I believe being good at a lot of different things creates a great hunter. Period. You know, hunting really good during the rut. Everyone's seen those kids' toys where you put a square in a square hole, a circle in a circular hole, right? You could be kick ass at putting the square in the square hole. But if you try putting the square in the circular hole, it's not going to do anything, right? Well, you could be really, really, really good at rut hunting, and the buck is only on this property that you hunt in early season. It does you no good to be very, very, very good at rut hunting in that situation. So if you're not afraid to fail and try new tactics and learn from new people, and you have the humility to say that you don't know everything, then you have the opportunity to improve and become better at a lot of different areas of your game. And being able to understand the situation that you're looking at and then take the skill that's applicable to it and execute with that skill is something that a lot of people lack, because a lot of people get very good at a certain discipline and don't choose to extend to those other disciplines.
Mhm.
That's when you see a lot of hunting only specific days, or I only hunt this situation in this tree and that. And I believe that you will be much more efficient and widely successful if you learn a lot of different skills and then apply them in other
Mhm.
situations.
Yeah, and those types of hunters that are really good. They got a system down and they're really good at that. I mean, those are the guys that we all love and we learn from. They've got it dialed in. They've made a whole hunting career out of it. And they're so good at it, and they're really good at explaining it. And I've learned so much from those guys. Um, but the way my brain works is I always want to get better. I always want to improve. Like, that's my number one goal. It's not really a wall full of big bucks. Like, those come over time as you get better. But I've always wanted to improve. So when I see, I don't have it in me to just like figure something out and just kind of ride it. It's always just like, well, I think I can do it better. I think I can improve here. I'm still making mistakes. I hate that I keep making this mistake. Or this guy over here is hunting a completely different way and is just as successful as this guy, and they both have their system. It's like I'm just always wanting to learn and improve. So it's just like I have that mentality of just like trying to pull all that knowledge, then implement it. And you're right. I'm just not afraid to fail. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not, because it's happened long enough now. I know if I run my game plan, I'm going to have success. I'm going to have some success. It would have to be extremely unlucky for me to not kill something on a given year, just because the amount I prepare, the experience I've had. And not every year is going to be awesome. I've had some terrible years, and some terrible mistakes, but I'm not afraid to go out there and just blow it, because I do have that confidence that I can get on another one, eventually.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I feel like, like we're talking about challenging yourself, trying new and different things, and not being as rigid. I mean, rigidity is fine. Like, a lot of people have a lot of success doing that. They're really good at one method of doing something, and that's what they stick with, and that is perfectly fine. But I feel like, and I kind of grew up that way, right? I grew up in Ohio. The way you hunted was you get in your ladder stand and hunt over a corn pile, and that was it, right? and I hunted that way growing up because that's what my dad did, right? That's how he was taught. But as I got older and started, branching out, trying new things, challenging myself, I found that like I reignited a fire for like just learning about whitetail and hunting in general. Like I feel like I don't, get any burnout. It's fun throughout the entire season. It just adds to the passion, I feel like. And it just makes for, a well-rounded season in my opinion. Like I don't experience the burnout that I feel like I used to when I was younger.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more enjoyable. Like last year I killed a couple of deer from the ground. Um, the one buck I was really after, because I had kind of a year of history with him. So I was like, which in Michigan is kind of hard to get any years of history with anything. But like this deer I did, he was really cool. He had cool antlers. He only ended up scoring like about 135 inches, which is a great deer. I mean, I love this deer. He's one of my favorite deer of all time. But he just had a cool rack where his brow tines went kind of back like this. And I saw him the year before, but I had a much bigger deer to chase. So I was like, I kind of just was like, he's kind of cool looking, like maybe next year. And then this year I kind of had my sights set on him because he had the age was right, he had the character, and he was just a neat deer. And he was very visible. He was out in the open all the time. So it just made for a really fun hunt. I never hunted for him out of a tree. I was always on the ground, always with my glass. I always had my decoy. Um, and it was just like I was just kind of sneaking around, glassing, slipping around, had the decoy to pop up whenever I needed it. And we had like it was, I can't remember, it was early November, but we had like this really weird just snow thing blow in, just for like 20 minutes. It was literally like white out snow for like 20 minutes and then it stopped. And I kind of was keying in on where this buck was living and where he was bedded. I had seen him out there a few times and I just could not get him to come out of the open to where I could hunt him. So I set my heads up decoy. I made a little post for it and I set it up kind of in the weeds and the snow hits and I'm like, what in the world? Like I'm looking at the radar and I'm like, geez, oh Pete's. I mean, it's tiny, this little cell, and it's just like I can't even see anything. And I'm looking at my bow, and I remember looking at my bow, and my cams were all white. My arrow had like this much snow going down the end of it, and I'm like, that's probably not good. And then I look up, and that buck is at my decoy, and I'm like, holy smokes, So I pull up and I draw back, and I'm looking at everything, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know if this is gonna go well. But I put the pin on him, and I release, and my arrow goes and hits at his feet. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So he doesn't know what happens. He kind of takes off into this field, and then he just starts walking towards a standing cornfield. It's still snowing. I literally grab my bow and I start running. He's walking, and I'm running behind him, because it's snowing and it's blowing. Like he has no idea. Again, I'm just going off all on instincts here. Like, this is the play. And he kind of slips into the corn. Don't see him again. And then I don't know, maybe a week later, not even, same thing. I get this really windy day. I know he's kind of bedded in this hedgerow at least half the time I've seen him come out of there. And I'm like, I'm just gonna slip in there. I got the wind. It's windy. I feel like I can sneak in there. We're approaching gun season. Like I have to get in close. So I slip in, and I am just like I'm on the slowest stalk of my life, moving just so slow. And I don't even know if he's in there, but I'm pretending like he's there, and I'm pretending like I know where he is because I know he the thickest part of this hedgerow is down at the other end. So I'm slipping through there, still hunting, and I see a doe get up out of her bed about 70 yards ahead. And I was like, okay, she goes out into the field, and then she comes like this and goes this way. So I'm just kind of being patient, slipping forward, just slow, just inching forward as as the hours are waning. And then all of a sudden I see something. I see a flash of white, and I see the buck come out into this field, and he's on that doe's trail. So he was bedded. He must have got up, walked, cut that doe, and now he's out in the field kind of doing this. So I'm sneaking through the woods as quickly as possible, try to close the gap. And I come right up to the edge, and he's going down a corn row, cut corn like this, and I just drop to my knees. I get a range, and I draw back and I stop him, and I shoot and ended up killing this buck. So, I missed him, ended up getting him, and it was all from the ground, all either decoy, spot and stalk, everything kind of still hunting. So a completely different type approach, but I felt like that was the approach for that buck. Given the fact he was so visible, given the fact he was always out in the open, I was seeing him at least every other hunt. So I knew I felt like it was a matter of time before he's going this way and I can cut him off, or he sees my decoy and he comes in, or, he's coming across the field and I can loop around and cut him off. And I felt like if I were to just sit in a stand, I was really limiting myself, you know? So that's just, I wanted to throw that scenario out, that hunt out there, because it's very indicative of like going with your instincts, being versatile, and having the confidence to hunt in that way.
Yeah.
Which is a little not traditional, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that speaks to your adaptation to the situation. Failed once, coming back, refining your approach, doing it again, making it work. That's perfectly with the theme of what we're talking about here. I'm gonna kind of sort of put you on the spot here, because I know you've killed a lot of deer, and I know that you've got probably a lot of examples thrown through your head. But I'd like to rifle through kind of a season process where you went through spring scouting and you went on to summer scouting. I know you do a lot of prep with glassing and stuff like that. Maybe trail cameras were involved, maybe they weren't. I know you do a little bit with gear prep and fitness, but kind of going all the way through how you prepared for this target, and then moving into your season, maybe how you scouted your way in, you adapted to the situation, maybe failure in there or not, and then eventually succeeded.
Like a hunt example.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got a really good one. I apologize because some of you may have heard it before. But this was a Michigan whitetail. He's a 9-point. He's 22 and a half inside, like low 160s, just an awesome deer. And he I had a picture of him as a 3-year-old. He was a great looking deer, 130. A picture of him as a 4-year-old. I hunted him as a 4-year-old. He was probably mid 140s. Another guy on the property ended up missing him that year with a gun. There were several guys after him. This is on a permission piece where you knock on the door. Even to this day, the guy was like, "Sure, go ahead," But it's like it's kind of a cluster out there. But the deer was right. It was the biggest deer, that I had to hunt that year. So anyway, I went in after that. After the year that he was a 3-year-old, I didn't really hunt him that year. As a 4-year-old, I got a picture of him in the summer in velvet under an apple tree. I spent time glassing for him. Never saw him. I probably took maybe a half dozen trips out there. This was a long ways from my house. It was an hour and 20 minutes from my house. So it was a little inconvenient. Never saw him glassing. Started to really dive through some of the trail cam pictures from the year prior. And what I did pick up on was like, I really didn't start getting pictures of him until like that late October timeframe, October 24th, 25th. And then it would be real he was there. It seemed like he was there or in there hitting these scrapes. And then it was real intermittent through like November, and then, nothing. So I made note of that. So I went in the spring. Before the velvet glassing, I did go in the spring, and I really broke that property down. And what I found was this spot. In my mind, this is where I'm going to kill him. It was a river bottom that was wooded on the side, comes up on a little rise. It's wooded all the way around. There's this opening that had like 3 big oak trees in it, and kind of almost like a little meadow, overgrown, good cover, scrapes all around it. Under all these oak trees were scrapes, a couple of big rubs. It's like, okay, that's that deer. And I just was like, it had everything. It had great access. It had the sign. I had trees I could get into, had openings to shoot. I'm like, this is the spot. Like the confidence was so high. And so I hunted there a few times throughout October. I just threw a few sits at it. Like I threw one early, didn't see anything, a few does. I threw one like mid-October, didn't see anything. And then I was like, well, I know he was here during the rut last year. I'm going to spend some time there, kind of late October timeframe, pre-rut. So I slip in there. I get up in the tree. It's, everything's right. It's like October 25th, and there's the wind is coming out of the north, which I think is perfect. It's blowing from the river across the trees, across the opening to me, blowing me through the rest of the woods, which is kind of just open. And I hear a deer blow from the north. The wind's blowing from the north, and I'm like, that's weird. And then I just hear like a lone deer like bound off. And sometimes our minds can play tricks on us, but you kind of feel like when it's like a big animal. And I was like, that didn't sound real good, that I have a feeling that was that deer, but I didn't know for sure. But I did take note, like, how did that, did that deer win me? Was he smelling something else, spooking from something else? So, I threw some milkweed up, and it's kind of swirling in there. I'm like, well, sometimes you don't know if is it swirling wind or is it um shifting wind, which is not, that uncommon for that time of year, especially when you're kind of transitioning from like mid-October to November. You get a lot of those shifting winds. Um so then I hunted a few more times during the rut, and at least two of those hunts, I had a deer blow at me to the north, and I was hunting it to the north. So then I start to pick this up. I'm like, okay, I think what is happening, the wind is coming over the top, it's hitting that opening, and it's swirling back. And every time I would do the milkweed, it would kind of like, it would be in my favor, and then it wasn't. And then it was blowing left, and then it was blowing right, and then it was blowing back. And I was just like, geez, I think that's what's happening here. I think everything is telling me to hunt this spot, everything, the sign and everything, but I think that's screwing me. So I didn't end up tagging the buck. Um, the following spring, I really break that piece apart, and I felt like I couldn't get any closer to the river bottom where I thought this deer was bedding. Um, so what I actually chose to do was to get further away. I actually got into more of that woods where I said it was open, where you would, technically wouldn't hunt a mature animal. It wasn't like crazy open. I mean, there was still some decent cover, but it was like farther away from bedding. It was farther away from the sign. I wasn't really crazy about it, but it was where I could get a consistent wind. And the way this deer was kind of coming out of bedding and hitting that sign, he was kind of slowly working his way to these big ag fields that were on the neighboring private. So I found a spot where it was away from that. I got up in a tree. I'm throwing, milkweed. I'm getting a consistent wind because there's no opening. It's kind of blowing through the trees. The foliage is down, obviously. Um, and I'm getting a consistent wind. And it was kind of like where the wood starts to pinch down and create like an inside corner to this point that goes out to the fields. So I felt like this is my best chance, to tag this buck. So then I do a deep dive into all the trail cameras. I pull all the cards. I made a little folder for him. I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at wind direction, which way is he going, and what I found was when he was a 3-year-old, when he was a 4-year-old, the first pictures I got him were October 24th, and the next one was October 25th. And then there was repetitive pictures at those scrapes in the oaks, um, right around that time frame for the next 2 or 3 days. And then I would get him like once November 7th, and he'd be with a doe, and then once November 13th, or So I could tell like he's moving in when the does are starting to get ready. Then he quickly latches up with a doe, and then it's very unpredictable. So I watched the weather. I had those dates in mind, and I looked, and I think it was October 24th, a major cold front came through, but it was really windy. And I remember Kenyon was after a buck too, and he calls me. He's like, man, what should I do? Like the cold front hits today, but it's windy, but tomorrow it's cold and it's calm. And I was like, I don't know. I really like those kind of calm days, after the front blows in. So we both decided to do that. So on the next day, October 25th, I sneak in, and I'm walking down that field edge where, the ag fields where that deer was kind of moving towards. And there are scrape after scrape after scrape opened up, and there are big prints in it. And I'm like, wow, he's here. Like, he is here. And I still hadn't gotten a trail cam picture of him that year because I had the trail cam picture in that opening where the oaks were, and I didn't want to risk going in there. So anyway, I reverse that. I did have verification that this buck had lived. I got a picture, a random picture in like January or something, so I knew he survived. Um, so I'm working down that edge, and then I slip into the woods, into that little inside corner where I got up in a tree, and it was so funny because I actually have a fair amount of this hunt on video. I was in there probably 4 hours before dark, and then about 2 hours before dark, I see a truck pull up here, and then a couple of guys walk down the trail here on the same property I'm hunting, and then I could see out into those ag fields, and I see trucks driving through the fields, back, parking on the edge, guys getting out with camo, and I'm like, holy smokes, like this deer is literally like surrounded. And there's just the pressure was so high, it was incredible. And wouldn't you know it though, this buck, it's October 25th. This buck, I see a doe. I see a doe like down kind of towards where that opening is, and I see a buck standing there. Or I see a deer standing there, and it looked like a really big deer. And I'm like, what is that? And I'm looking through my glass, and he steps out, and I just see this big old wide rack. He's still to this day the widest whitetail I've killed. And they just start working their way, and they work through that opening just like where I had sat and gotten busted, and they're working, he's kind of pushing her, but they're working my way, and they end up coming right through, right around that inside corner. Gave me like a 25-yard shot.
Nice.
So just a really cool deer that I learned a lot from. I learned a lot about terrain and terrain openings and how that can be really difficult to manage your wind in there. But it was cool because it kind of took a little bit of everything. It took a little bit of creative thinking, avoiding the pressure, abandoning the spot that I thought for sure I would kill him because the sign was there, and backing up into a spot where there literally was no sign. There was no sign. I was still in the area, in the region, but there was no sign where I hunted. It was strictly a terrain funnel. And that's another thing too, just it popped into my head. Like a lot of times where we find these signs or we find these beds, it's great, but a lot of times they bed there because the wind is so shifty. And you have to really keep that in mind when you're like, you find this bed and you're all excited and I'm going to get as close as I can. Sometimes they're bedded there because they can smell everything around them because it does this. Specifically, if you throw some terrain in there, again, if you throw some water or some moisture in there, they like it because it's very turbulent in there and they can smell danger. So a lot of times what I found, if you get in too tight, you blow the hunt, and you get back where you can actually get a consistent wind. They get up naturally, they take their time, they drink it in, it's safe. They start to wag their tail, they're browsing, they're feeding, maybe other deer are moving, now they're coming. So it's a give and take there, and I screw it up every year, but I've learned that over time that these big mature bucks do a lot of times like those areas where they have an advantage of swirling winds like that. And it can be really tricky.
Yeah, and I love that you touched. I mean, that was such a great example that touches every area of the process, even over years of time too, dealing with pressure and everything like that. A lot of people ask, like, man, I just don't know when these guys decide to stop. Like, when is it good enough, or when? How do you quantify that that's the right spot? And I think you answered it to an extent. Is that you stop on your initial thought when you determine through all your work that this is enough sign or this is enough information, but you can be wrong about that. And to show that you're pushing the envelope, and most people would hear that deer below, that solo deer you were talking about, and not really think much of it, like, oh, probably coyote or something like that. And you chose to learn from that example, and you chose to investigate it a bit, and you actually learned something that you will now, and I'm sure have applied in many, many different hunts. I really like that you related the sign that you saw. I think this is very important for people, to the time of year that you were seeing that deer on camera. So you're looking in, for me in Wisconsin, that's like late pre-rut. That's kind of like getting into rut. That's often when I see bucks taking their inventory, like you were saying, and they're figuring out what does they're going to chase after. I really like that you found the sign that applies to that time of year. You weren't hunting him on browsing sign from oaks. You weren't hunting him on late season sign by corn and stuff like that. You were hunting him specifically in the sign that applied to the time of year you had already worked to find out. I really like that you touched on that. And then walking your way in scouting, I wanted to ask you a question about this a bit. Of course, really valuable seeing those scrapes on the edge, seeing the big tracks, having the confidence to know that that is that deer in that area, knowing that he's going to be in another area with scrapes because you saw that on the way in. But often I'm diverting my routes on the way in to try and find that sign if it's not disturbing the area I'm hunting, to tell me if that deer is in there or not. Are there times that you go into hunts where you're strategically choosing your route in order to quantify, okay, are the fresh tracks here? Was this scrape work that definitely would be worked if he was using that bedding area? Are you kind of purposefully choosing your route to see that sign on the way in?
Yeah. I mean, all the time. Not every time, but I do that a lot. Specifically, if I don't have, like, a lot of times when I'm efficient on a hunt, it's because I feel like I've gathered the intel. I've visually seen it, like maybe the hunt before. Like I'm picturing, I'm hunting and I see the buck do something, and then the next, I have that information. And the next day, I have the confidence to move in. I know he's there. I have an idea of what he's doing, and boom, a lot of times I can get my crack that way. Or maybe you go out and you check some cameras and like, oh man, he was hitting this scrape. Or it's a trend from year to year. I know, he, like that buck I just talked about, he's shown up on the same day, essentially 3 years in a row. And when I checked that camera, by the way, it was October 25th was my first. So October 24th, 25th, 25th on the same scrape.
Wow.
But yes, if I don't have that, if I don't have a visual of the buck, or I don't have a picture, I'm out there looking for the sign. And I want one of those three things for me to put in time in a tree. And that's what creates the efficiency, rather than just, I'm gonna go, he might be here, he might not, I'm gonna go sit in the stand. I used to do that a lot, and sometimes you're right. And some, especially during the rut, you can just put yourself in a spot that's a good spot, and it can pay off. But outside of those kind of that rut phase, for me personally, um, with limited time to actually put in a tree, I choose to spend my time scouting and gathering information, and then moving in when I have that confidence that I can go in and kill that buck. The rut's a little different. I think that a lot could be said of just finding a good rut spot, putting the time in the tree, spending a lot of hours, bouncing around to high percentage spots. But outside of that, which I've, killed a lot of my deer outside of the rut, it's become the game of efficiency has become that gathering the info and then moving in when I have it. So it might be literally like throughout, from October 1, say, to October 30th, it might be like 6 calculated hunts, and I end up killing a couple mature bucks, versus hunting 3-4 days a week, kind of not really gaining that information. And that's just the style that I've kind of come into on my own. Not saying that's what everybody should do, because there's a lot to be said just going out there and enjoying your time. And a lot of times I'll just go out and sit, but it's going to be in a spot where I can observe. It's basically on a mission to observe or to glass or to overlook an area.
Purpose driven.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of our audience's time, so I feel like this is a good transition here to kind of open it up for some Q&As.
Absolutely.
So if anyone has some questions for us or Andy, feel free to stand up and ask or raise your hand. Rick has the mic right there. He is in the center aisle. I promise you there are no dumb questions, and I promise you us three sitting up here are way more nervous than you guys out there asking questions. So please, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and then Rick's gonna
Rick has
direct
an
you.
X back here.
Yeah,
the,
he's got
the
a
gentleman raising his hand. Put that microphone pretty much right up to your chin so it can pick up your audio. Then we'll have it recorded here, and Andy will answer your questions for you.
I think Mr. Perry has a question. Yeah, go ahead and go around, Mike.
Go to Rick here real
Yeah.
quick.
Oh, hold on. This gentleman here had a question earlier. So,
okay.
Mike, come on back here too. So, can you come on back here? It'll get squelched if you come.
Yeah, you can go ahead and head back there so you have the mic there. We'll just form a little line there.
It'll get squelched if we go any further up. So just put it right there on your chin and talk.
All right.
Yeah, when you go out early in the morning, when you are doing a land piece that you've never been, do you go extremely early or do you wait till daylight so you can kind of scout your way in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've done both. So like if it was during the rut, I've had spots where it's like you know, I've either scouted online, you know, and it's like a clear funnel or something. It's like I'm gonna get there. I want to be there at first light. And I've went there super early, even tried setting up in the dark, and then it gets light, and it's like, oh man, I can barely shoot. So I've kind of adopted more of um, I might get into the area that I want before dark, or close to it, but then I like to let it kind of get gray, especially if I haven't been there, because then I can see, it gives me a much clearer picture of um, what I'm dealing with. Because sometimes when I look at that map and it looks great, then I get back there and it's not. There's other stands, or like there's just not a lot of traffic through there, or whatever it is. Um, but I do like to maximize that. So it's not like I'll be pulling up at the parking lot when it's cracking light. I mean, maybe if it's like an open area, like you're in a Kansas or some of these spots I've hunted in Iowa, that like, you get out of that car, you're hunting, essentially, because it's open and you can glass. But I picture some of these spots where I've traveled, like to Kentucky or Illinois, and it's like a lot of times I will start the track through areas I know I'm not going to hunt in the dark, and then it's cracking light. I'm slowing down. Now I'm kind of picking my way through. I'm quieter. I'm able to pick my spot a little more accurately, and more importantly, get in a tree if that's what I'm going to do, where I can actually shoot. So it kind of depends. If it's a spot that I've been to before, um, it could go either way. If I know the tree that I'm going to go to, like Southern Ohio during the rut, I might just burn in there, a couple hour and a half before daylight, and get set up and go. But I think there's a benefit to kind of slowly picking your way through too, because I've had the experience of the success on the ground. So I feel very comfortable doing that. I feel very comfortable on the ground. I feel very comfortable sneaking on the ground, and it's created a lot of opportunities for me, and it's made me see things that have made me divert from the original plan. You know, maybe I hear a buck chasing over here. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna head this way, or I see it, or I see sign that I would have missed in the dark. So it kind of depends, but I do like that option that you said about kind of moving through, at least slowing down and moving through when you're getting close where you can see, especially during the rut. If it's like an early season thing, uh, I'd be more likely to get in there like real early, maybe let it crack light, but I'm in that area, and then get set up, real quietly.
I'm going to give an example of what I did I think it was this past season. Um, so it was a piece down in Kentucky. I had scouted it before. I was hunting it was Chris and I don't know if Chris is out in the audience still, but anyway, so I planned my access, and I'd never gone this way. I had a kayak across the lake, and I had planned my access out. Like, I'm gonna get to this spot, early in the dark, but I had never been there. On a map, it looked good. So I, get there really early, kayak across this lake. I go into this cove, and then, I tie up my kayak, and I go to, walk in, and I end up running into this giant briar thicket. Like, I couldn't get through this thing. I was sweating like no other, cursing in the dark. I'm like, this was a terrible idea. I had to wait till it got somewhat light to work my way out of there and to get to the spot I wanted to. In that scenario, I probably would have been much better off waiting until gray light and going in. So, like Andy said, it can kind of depend.
We got a living legend with a question over there, Mr. Michael Perry.
Yeah, actually, I got two questions if you don't care. One, which repetitive mistake did you eliminate to increase your odds? And two, where are you putting your cameras at in a new area that you're going to try to get the best pictures of bucks?
Yeah, good question. Gosh, mistakes. One, and I've talked about this pretty openly. I early on, well, it wasn't even really early on. It was more kind of like the middle of my hunting life. I had a really hard time um, closing the deal with the shot. I would kind of poop the bed with making a good shot on some of these deer, and I was dealing with target panic. In fact, 2011, I missed. I wounded two and missed two, so 4 bucks total, all over 150 inches. Um, and as you can imagine, I did end up tagging a few bucks, but I felt like that season was a complete failure, and my confidence was really low. And when I look back now, the whole beginning of, I was always a really good archery shot. From I got a bow, got in a league, my very first time ever shooting archery, and I won that league. So I was naturally good with a bow, just good eye-hand coordination. Um, but I was shooting completely wrong, and slowly over time developed, this target panic. When I look back at all the animals I had killed prior to that, I mean, I was punching the trigger on all of them, and hitting a lot of them back in the liver, back hits, long track jobs. Um, but that year stands out to me as the year where I just was like, enough is enough. I got to figure this out, and I ended up learning from some guys that were better archers than me. Not necessarily bow hunters, more like target guys that dealt with target panic and now are really accurate with a bow. And I learned how to master that unanticipated release, shoot with more of a back tension type style. I grabbed a hinge release that really taught me how to be patient in the shot and execute a good shot rather than just drive by shooting and hammering that trigger. And go to 2012, I go on an early season hunt to Maryland, and I've been practicing with the hinge and the thumb button all summer. There's no target panic. I'm feeling great. The day before I leave, I'm like, I don't know if I can hunt with this. I'm going back to my index. I was like, I shot my index a few in the backyard, and I was pulling through and doing fine. And I scout my way in on this piece and get set up in the morning, mainly for an observation stand. And wouldn't you know it, there's like this big mature buck working down this hill towards me. And I pull back and completely panic and boom, hit that trigger and shot right over his back. And I'm like, jeez, oh Pete's. So I threw that release away, completely revamped the way I shot, executed my shot, and did the work to kind of get rid of target panic, which really was helpful talking to some of these target guys, the guys that have been through it and now do it for a living. And now I shot with a thumb button using back tension for years, much better execution, and now I hunt with a hinge. So that's been really helpful. The other thing that I think made a big difference was like kind of what we touched on earlier was just getting away from that kind of being scared to fail, being scared to spook a deer. Early on, I was very timid and very hesitant to do anything that was different than like what some of the guys are writing in like North American Whitetail and hunting on the field edges, and just really being kind of scared to like dive in and go for it. And like I said, I had some success, but it was just from hunting every day. I mean, it really was from hunting every day. And when I really look at some of those first bucks those bucks I killed, those first 5-7 years, there was a lot of like 2-year-old bucks. I didn't spend a lot of time killing 1.5-year-old bucks, but a lot of like 2-year-old 100-inch, 110-inch bucks, which were great bucks. I mean, I learned so much. But occasionally, like on accident, I would kill like a 3-year-old. But then when I started like just getting out of the norm and branching into starting to open my mind into developing my own style, I got a little more aggressive. That's when I started getting more of those encounters. And then it just kind of snowballed from there into more aggressiveness and learning when to hold up, when to push forward, and then creating that kind of versatile style. But those two things I would say had probably the most impact for me being more consistent and more confident. I was, the shot thing in particular was a really difficult time, and I still work on it every day. I work on it every day, and just for me personally, that's been a point of difficulty that I've had to overcome.
Uh, first of all, first of all, Andy, thank you for today. I've heard you on several podcasts. You've always done a great job and shared a lot of information. So my question is, when your preseason, you said those 3 weeks before the season starts, you really hit on scouting, and most of that is glassing and driving. And you're doing this across 4 different counties on multiple pieces of property, correct?
Yep.
Can you maybe explain what that process looks like? I mean, you're saying you're doing this on a limited time. You have a young daughter that's in travel sports. I do too.
Yep.
So our time's limited. Like, how are you doing this, and how many miles are you putting on your truck when you're doing it?
Yeah, a lot of miles, and I've said this before too. Um, Before my daughter, I this was all I did really. I've spent every scouting 5-6 days a week. I mean, I went from work to the woods, back to work to the woods, and that those times are really crucial in developing, I think, a lot of this, making a lot of those mistakes. When I had her, priorities changed. Then I was much more picky and choosy about when I spent that time, trying to work around her schedule and making sure I'm there and present. Um, so now that kind of looks like the spots that set up well for glassing is where I'll glass. And I like to do, kind of go off the previous year's history or prior years where I know these spots tend to hold a good batch or group of bucks. I'm going to check that one. It's conducive for glassing. I'm going to glass there. I'm going to spend at least a few times glassing there, but I'm not going to just you know, be out there every day for 2 weeks. I might have 2 or 3 spots that are like that. I could think, 2 or 3 off the top of my head that set up well for glassing. Usually early season, there's a couple of good bucks there. I will use glassing tactics for those. Some of the other spots might be just camera work. I might go put a camera on a water hole or an apple tree or on it might be on a field edge, and maybe they're getting there after dark, but I've done the scouting previously to kind of know where I think they're coming from. Um, so I do utilize cameras to help me save time, and the glassing in the areas where that's conducive. I feel much more confident if I can see it. Um, pictures are awesome. They're helpful without a doubt in saving time. But if I can actually see a deer doing something, which that late summer they give you that opportunity. They're still moving in a lot of cases, still moving like they were in the summer. And in Michigan, it's a little harder because we do have a later opener. But I've still been able to find a couple of bucks moving out in the open. And if they're not out in the open, if the pressure around has increased with guys scouting, I kind of know where they bump back to a lot of times, or at least where they're coming from, and they're just moving later from the previous scouting. So it's hard. I don't feel like I'm doing an awesome job at that, like I was when I had all the time. I'm trying to do an awesome job at being a dad and being present, and I'm trying to do that when I can. So, do I get to everything? No, I don't. Our bucks, slipping through the cracks that I don't even know exists. Absolutely. But I look at it as um, I want to be a good father. I want to be present. I also want her to see that I have a passion that I'm really committed to, and I want her. I don't try to hide that. She sees me go to the gym. She sees me shoot my bow every day. She sees me scout, for an hour here, 2 hours there. I want her to see that. I want her to maybe find something like that too, and maybe that's inspiring to her to find her own passion and put in some work to that someday. But I don't want to be prioritize that over family and just be that guy, you know. So I don't get to everything. I try to prioritize where I know a buck survived, or where if there's a spot where I know tends to be good, I will spend the time on those when I can, when those windows of opportunity happen. Like the past 2 weeks, I've been wanting to go out and glass. I know we're still away from the season, but I just wanted to start getting some inventory. I'm like, I'm going to get out and glass. You know, the last 2 weeks, I haven't been able to get a window. You know, we've just been too busy. So, um, and that's fine. You know, I'll prioritize a little more time leading up to the season, because that's the time that really has seemed to pay off for me. But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard balance. But I've heard people say it. I think Dan has said it. No one's gonna remember about the bucks you kill. You know, I mean, you probably can't even tell the bucks that I killed last year, right? I mean,
No.
but your daughter will remember, your son will remember you being there, and you know, teaching them about your passion in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think that's the two lessons I take from you most consistently is never stop improving, and that there's much more to the journey than killing a deer. And you hear from a lot of the guys that spend a lot of their time hunting and sort of almost a past life, that the family will never go away, and that's something that sticks for forever, and that should be in many minds their priority. And I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Kind of a two-part question. Michigan is doing early doe season through all public lands this year in the Lower Peninsula. Is that going to change this scouting regimen at all for you? And then secondly, kind of with that, how much of your time do you spend scouting pressure versus the deer themselves?
Um, yeah, that potentially could throw a big wrench in things. I wasn't real thrilled with that, to see that, even though I do know we need to take some does. Um, I don't know. It's really gonna depend. It's kind of been a mixed bag if guys even participate in that early doe. I personally don't. Um, but it definitely could impact some things. It probably will impact some things greatly. I would imagine pushing some deer back into the cover a little sooner than they would. Um, you know, it's really going to come back down to that scouting, because even though I do on occasion see a buck still hitting a field, or still seeing a buck move through like an overgrown field heading to, you know, to food, and I can capitalize on that in the first day of the season. It's not all that common here like it is in the other states. You know, our deer we just have so many people. They get bumped. They get that pressure of guys getting excited before season. They're glassing. They're going out there. They're hanging their stands. They're scouting. They're putting cameras up, and it's just they just feel that pressure. So I've learned that a lot of times that's not where you kill them. You might glass them there, but you might end up killing them back in the cover, and that comes back to my scouting. So I just gotta anticipate that might happen more often. Um, and what was the other question?
I believe it was about are you spending a lot of time scouting people rather than the deer
Yeah.
to avoid pressure?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely keeping track of where you know, where I find the hunting pressure, and it changes, man. It fluctuates, because there have been pieces that I've wanted to hunt so bad, and I go back there and there are stands everywhere, and there's people and there's trash, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And you know, I'll go back 2 years later, and it's like nobody's hunting it. You know, and I think these trends happen where maybe there's a big deer in there, or maybe the deer numbers are good, and guys pick up on it. They're running cameras, they're getting all this action, and they go in there and they hunt the crap out of it, and then the deer leave, you know, or they start getting pushed out. Well, then people are going back there and hunting, and they're not seeing as much, and they stop going there, and then like the deer start using it a little more. So I don't put all of that into one experience. I don't give up on a spot that seems like it's just completely overrun, because what I found is that the deer will adapt, the people will adapt to the deer adapting, and then eventually it could become something worthwhile again. I've seen that a lot. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I handle that.
And I believe Michael Perry, you had a second part to your question about
Yep.
trail cameras.
I forgot to answer
specifically.
that. Yeah.
No worries. I was gonna just add to it a little bit. There's like classes of areas that people put trail cam. Obviously, there's features like scrapes, rubs, trails, things like that. But I was just gonna to give you some food for thought. Um, are you looking for mostly survey locations? I know you talked about season soaks. Are you looking to do things outside of bedding? You're looking to do things on travel hubs. And I assume you don't always do this. But are you ever putting them where you actually plan to set up? Are you ever putting them where you plan to shoot to that camera? What's kind of your strategy with that?
Yeah, those are good questions. I would say the vastly the way I use trail cameras are more for like an inventory. I'll often put them in places that are easy to check, that deer utilize. That's not going to impact where I want to hunt. Um, I feel pretty confident that if I can get a picture of the deer, either if it's an area that I'm super intimate with that I know very well, that I can go back, relate that back to past experience, past scouting, and have a good hunt. Or even if I get a picture of that deer just looking at the map and going off previous experiences, like he's probably coming out of this bowl or this swamp or this marsh or this island. I do feel confident on going back like that. I don't really like putting my cameras where I have to intrude to check them. Um, but I do like checking them. I do like checking them. The ones that I mentioned, kind of more on the perimeter, fairly often. I feel like where I'm applying that pressure is not detrimental to where I actually want to kill them. But I do like to know, and that's a tool to know, like when a deer shows up. Um, when a deer shows up or when he's there, and then I can slide in real quick and get that hunt. Um, the other way is like I mentioned, putting them in those more intrusive spots and then just letting them soak and using that information for the future. Um, I've learned a lot that way. That's probably my favorite way. Scrapes are great. Travel hubs are great, where a lot of trails come together. I do a lot of mock scrapes. If there's a spot where I feel like should get a lot of traffic and I'm just trying to get a picture, I'll create a nice mock scrape there, and then that will be that kind of point of interest that will get deer in front of the camera. Um, I'm try to be very cognizant not to rely on trail cameras. I don't really love the way technology is going in hunting. I use technology, so I understand that makes me a bit of a hypocrite, but I have found myself in Michigan so completely frustrated on a certain year where I cannot find a deer to go after. And I basically am just throwing cameras out, and then I'm just checking cameras and I'm hunting off cameras, and it getting away from what I'm actually good at, which is scouting on foot and reading sign. And I've found myself kind of falling into that trap on a few seasons, and I didn't like that feeling. I felt like I wasn't utilizing my skills as much, and it just wasn't very enjoyable to me. It was more stressful. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, do I put them where I hunt? Not often. Not often. And a lot of times I'm going into a spot where there's not anything prepped either, so it's not there's no camera there. If there's a good you know primary scrape or something, or a good funnel, along a river bottom or something that I know for years gets good traffic, and I just want to have it out there. I have like a rut spot set up or something, a tree picked out or trimmed or whatever. Yeah, I might do that. It's something I can kind of check on the way to the tree, or at the tree I can check it. But I don't really make a habit of trying to accomplish that.
Yeah, that's what I figured. We are at our time. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and learn from you, not only over the years, but especially during this podcast here. And I know Josh and I are absolutely thrilled that we got to have you on here, and I know our audience is extremely thankful too. So Andy, thank you so much for concluding our series of the Whitetail Apprentice and being on this.
Yeah, thank you guys. And if anyone wants to chat or anything, I'm going to be around for a while. I'll be here tomorrow too. So if you want to have some questions or anything, feel free.
Cool.
Thank you
you, Andy.
guys. Thank you.